This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to researcher and writer Joey Ayoub. He's going to be talking to us about the recent situation on October 14th, where a full-on gun battle broke out for several hours in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. Joey's going to explain how this happened, what led up to it, and he'll also be explaining how the two main militias involved, Hezbollah and Amal, kind of have a grip on the country right now. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. So obviously there was this horrible situation last week in Lebanon, Beirut specifically, with there was gun battles, several people were killed. But that started off because there was this protest, right, about this judge involved with the port explosion last year. Before we get into the kind of chaos and the gun battles and how that started, maybe we can just start at that and start about, like, why was this protest actually, why was it happening?
All right. Well, the quick answer is because Hezbollah called for it. And they called for it the day before. Threats were being made in the previous days and weeks before that happened. But, Hassan Nasrallah was pretty direct about this. He wants the judge, Tariq Bitar, and Hassan Nasrallah being obviously the leader of Hezbollah, has been pretty direct about this. He wants the judge, Tariq Bitar, removed. Now, this judge is actually the second judge tasked with investigating the August 2020 port explosion, the explosion at the port of Beirut. The judge before him was forced to resign, and we found out soon after that he was also being threatened and he received a number of death threats, that sort of thing. Tariq Bitar, as of now, has not resigned. He seems to actually be pretty brave, to be honest, given that he has himself also said many times that he has received direct threats from Hezbollah and or from Amal, Hezbollah's main ally in government right now. And so this culminated in the October 14 events. The clashes, essentially the gun battles, as you mentioned. But that's sort of the background. They were told beforehand to go at 11 a.m., I believe, on October 14 to protest and to demand that Judge Tariq Bitar be removed.
Right. And why exactly is it they want him removed?
Well, obviously, they will give you their reasons. They will say things as they've been saying so far. They would say stuff like Tariq Bitar is compromised. He doesn't like us. He is, working in league with the Americans, kind of the usual stuff. Obviously, without presenting a single shred of evidence. They have their mediascape, they have their media environments. They've been pushing kind of the same stories. The irony is, and maybe we can get into this a bit more, is that while the clashes were actually happening on October 14th, Nabi Habari, the Speaker of Parliament, leader of Amal, main ally of Hezbollah, was actually meeting with the US ambassador. So, there's a lot of those same discourses that are being presented, if you want. Now, why they are so intimidated and terrified, I guess you might say, by the investigation in port of Beirut, a lot of people will have the theories. Mine is, I think, rather straightforward. It does seem likely that the ammonium nitrate that was present at the port of Beirut had at least something to do with Syria, although we don't exactly know in details what. It may be that. It may also be, as in both, that any kind of serious accountability in Lebanon is dangerous for these people. And I'm not only speaking about Hezbollah or Amal here. You have to remember that the entirety of what we usually call post-war Lebanon, which I usually put in quotations, i.e. since 1990, roughly 1990, 1991, when what is usually called the Lebanese Civil War, which was in fact multiple wars, when they officially ended. They ended with a peace agreement and with an amnesty law that forgave most crimes committed prior to that date in 91. And so effectively, the warlords that were running the show during the war, especially those that were running the show in the 80s, simply joined government in the 90s. And a couple of them, one went in exile, one was imprisoned. They came back in 2005. They're actually part of the story. We'll probably get into them as well. So, the notion of the very idea of accountability in Lebanon is more dangerous to this establishment class than anything that real or fictional enemies can pose to them, if you see what I mean. And so for me, the answer is pretty straightforward. They don't want an investigation, period. Investigations are not good for them, whether it's Hezbollah, Amal, or the others. As it happens this time around, because they are the dominant parties, they are the ones opposing it.
Yeah, it definitely feels very fishy. I know what you mean. Like either way, it's just like, yeah, it's like they don't want anything, no light shining upon them, I guess, in this situation. Exactly. Maybe before we get into this a bit more, maybe you can just explain who Amal is, because I had a lot of people, I was kind of said, oh, Hezbollah, Amal fighters, and people saying, who's Amal? Like, what's that? Maybe you can explain that for us. I know they're outside of Lebanon and the Middle East, they're kind of lesser known.
Yeah. So Hezbollah came out of Amal. Amal is the first. Amal, I think the translation in English is like the movement for the dispossessed or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Founded by Musa Sadr and a number of others. Musa Sadr, some people might know him. He was an Iranian Lebanese politician who was very likely kidnapped and murdered by Gaddafi some years ago. But anyway, so Hezbollah comes from Amal. Amal is the party that managed to was the most popular party with a section of the Lebanese population up until roughly the mid-80s, when Hezbollah started coming into the scene. And in fact, one of the last battles of what we call the civil war was between Amal and Hezbollah. Amal was being supported by the Syrian regime at the time, Hafez al-Assad's regime, and Hezbollah was being supported by the Iranian ones. They sort of cut a deal in the end, and although it's kind of a simplification, what ended up happening, and remember, this is in a context where southern Lebanon was still occupied up until the year 2000. So I'm talking about the 90s. Mm-hmm. That basically the deal was that Amal would take care of government stuff because everything works by sectarian quotas, and that they're both part of the Shia sect. Like Amal would, take care of government stuff. Nabi Hiberi became Speaker of Parliament and he's been in that position since 1992. Again, the leader of Amal and the Speaker of Parliament. And Hezbollah would take care of, resistance stuff. That was essentially in the 90s. That sort of changed in 2000. Hezbollah progressively joined the government, and, long story short, that's 2 decades now. They are now effectively the dominant party in government. They don't have the highest number of seats, but due to the sectarian due to the sectarian political system in Lebanon, you don't have to have a majority of seats. You just have to. It's basically coalitions. So they're among them. So Amal, Hezbollah, and the Free Patriotic Movement, the party of the current president, are the 3 dominant political parties at the moment.
Right. And how is it now then that Amal and Hezbollah basically side by side every time there's, they want to run out with guns and whatever?
In Arabic, they're called like the Shiite duo, because they work together, and, everything has a sectarian title in Lebanon. They are essentially allies. Kind of like as a parenthesis, I would say that their alliance as of now is strong, but I wouldn't be entirely sure. I wouldn't be confident enough to say that it's a permanent alliance. There are lots of tensions from within. Really? They have different visions of what things should be like. Right now, the visions don't matter as much, because Nabi Hiberi is sort of he's very much a godfather figure of the Amal movement, and he's still, he's like in his late 80s. At some point when he passes away, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen to that alliance, but I obviously cannot predict.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So Hezbollah and Amal, they have this protest October 14th, and the first thing I heard is there's gunshots coming from roofs and people are getting shot. Where is that at now? I know at the time it was extremely confusing. People weren't sure what it was. I heard some it's Christian paramilitaries, some it's the military, the Lebanese forces. What happened? Do we know yet?
We don't exactly know yet. No, and it's one of those things that most likely we will never know, because I mean, this is the irony, is that the entire protest originally was about preventing an investigation. So you're not actually going to have an investigation into this either. It does seem likely, although to be objective, I will say that we simply do not know, and it is not confirmed. I think there is a decent possibility that it was those Christian paramilitaries. So that would be the Lebanese forces, which are right now being basically a rival sectarian party, I would say, to the Hezbollah-dominated sectarian parties in government. There's a lot of reasons why one would conclude that. There's kind of like a political analysis. There's so essentially what I would argue is as a likely scenario is that Samir Jarjar, the leader of the Lebanese forces, is trying to replace, or at least challenge, if you want, the Free Patriotic Movement, because they both have the same demographic base, i.e. Lebanese Christians. And so right now, the FPM, which is the Free Patriotic Movement, which is, as I said, the party of the president and is also a Christian majority, is allied with Hezbollah and Amal. But they are being put in kind of, I would say, uneasy positions. They still officially support the investigation, for example, which obviously makes it quite awkward given that the two main allies are the most aggressively opposed to the investigation. And they are sort of, what the Lebanese forces are trying to do essentially, and that's kind of my interpretation if you want, is to sort of say, well, we are the real deal. We will oppose Hezbollah. We are here for Lebanon. We are the Christians, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And they're sort of playing that game. It's important to note that early next year are the elections. I don't actually know what's going to happen there. I think that's a different kind of analysis that we need to kind of to engage in. But I think that's one of the reasons, maybe one of the main reasons why there seems to be I think it's quite likely that it was them. That being said, we simply do not know. We simply do not know. You have everything from people saying it was actually a false flag operation, from Hezbollah operatives. I don't think that's a likely proposition, just because I don't know if they are that dumb. Yeah. And there are others who are saying it was like rogue elements of the Lebanese military. I mean, it's not impossible. Not that's the thing. Neither of these three propositions are impossible. Sorry, but I just don't see that as being a likely one. So that's kind of like that's my long-winded answer to just saying that we don't know who these snipers were. There is a likely possibility that it was the Lebanese forces. It's kind of their area. They were kind of there. That seems to be the likely scenario, but I wouldn't be objective if I said that I knew.
Yeah, I think what you're saying sounds like very likely, but at the same time, I think if they wanted to show we will fire on Hezbollah, why then not come out and say, it was us? I know that would obviously cause a lot of violence, but it just seems like it's like, why would they do it and then just be like, oh shit, vanish? You know what I mean? Maybe it was just to shoot people. I don't know.
I think there are reasons. Because if they actually acknowledge it openly, then that's officially war between them, or at least that's an escalation. Yeah. And however, as much as they want to show their strength, their forces simply do not compare to Hezbollah. There's just no comparison between the two forces. We don't have numbers of how much each group has, but Hezbollah has been training for a long time. They've been in Syria for 8-9 years now. The Lebanese forces have not really seen battle of this scale since the 1980s. And so, realistically speaking, I just don't think they would be that confident literally telling Hezbollah, who we are, where we are, come at us. I don't think it's that straightforward. But another reason, which is slightly more insidious, I think, is that ultimately, I think, this is a possible scenario. I cannot predict the future, but I think a likely scenario is that the Lebanese forces and Hezbollah simply make some kind of deal. Because this is always what happens. This has always been the case. This is not the first time this happens. In fact, now we're in a weird situation where Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, Nabih Berri, leader of Amal, are actually having the same exact position as Fouad Siniora, who I'll explain who he is later on, and Walid Jumblat, the leader of the so-called Progressive Socialist Party, basically saying that the investigation should stop, he should be replaced, it's all a corruption, etc., etc. What's ironic about all of this is that Fouad Siniora was sort of the reason why the last conflict happened in 2008 with Hezbollah. Fouad Siniora was the prime minister at the time, allied with the Saudis, And he, his government said that they're going to confiscate the telecommunication network that Hezbollah was operating, because they said, and I mean that was probably true, that a lot of it was coming from Iran, and Iran had this penetration essentially on Lebanese soil. Hezbollah within the next day or something immediately declared war. And that's when you had the May events of 2008, kind of like a mini civil war over a few days, when in that kind of span of time, Hezbollah essentially took over, and its allies, Amal and the SSNP and a few others, essentially took over parts of Beirut and even parts of Mount Lebanon. And to this day, some of those demarcations still exist. If you go to Hamra Street, which is the part of West Beirut that's like in between the two major universities in Ras Beirut, you would see the SSNP flags. Those swastika flags. They say they're not swastika, but they're essentially swastika.
Yeah, it's just a storm, Joey. Don't worry.
Right. So you will see those flags there. Those are from 2008. They were not there before then. That's kind of the background to that. But anyway, that's a kind of a side note. Yeah.
Okay, then. Well, let's maybe go into actually kind of how the day unfolded. Obviously, snipers started shooting from the roofs. But then we saw this footage, like it just all hell broke loose for like a couple of hours, right? Like maybe just kind of take us through it if you can.
As much as I can. So the snipers did, as you said, started shooting at the crowd within very quickly. I actually don't know the exact timeline, but definitely within the hour or so, you have hundreds of Hezbollah men who were basically called for backup. So part of the conspiracy is due to that, if you see what I mean. Like it was extremely well organized, although it wasn't. It just seemed that way because you had all of these people as backup. But people who know Hezbollah know, I think by now, that they always have kind of like a number of men who are willing to just put on guns, and just go to fight.
Yeah.
It was extremely chaotic. Luckily, only 6 people died, and that's already a lot, obviously, including one woman who was just in her kitchen in the house, and she was
Mariam, right?
Yeah, Mariam. And there was a stray bullet, and unfortunately, that killed her. So that's sort of what happened. It lasted a few hours. It was extremely chaotic in number of Hezbollah, Amal. I don't always know who is which, but one of the two, they were together, started launching RPGs, clearly not knowing where to aim. There was a lot of videos and journalists who were there and who testified on, posted on Twitter and stuff. They were interviewing some of these men, and the men they didn't know exactly where they were shooting at. They were shooting in the general direction of maybe where they heard the sniper or something like that. So that's why you had all of those images that, for many people in Lebanon, are very iconic of the civil war, which is the bullet ridden buildings, essentially, right? And that's sort of what happened. Dozens, unfortunately I don't have the number, but definitely dozens of people were injured. So I don't know if the death tally will go up, but lots of shops were destroyed. There were these horrific images, which again reminds us of the 80s especially, but also the 2006 war and so on, between Israel and Hezbollah, of children kind of waiting, children in school, waiting in the hallway. I can give some kind of personal anecdotes. I have a couple of friends who were in next to one of the areas that was where it was, there were a lot of gunfires. They had to leave basically running from the house because the bullets were getting very close. A friend of mine has a photo that he posted on Instagram a few days ago of him holding I think 20 bullets in his hand, because that's just how many bullets were just flying around. Just so many different things. Parents, one person posted on Twitter, basically the headmaster of a school or some person at the school saying, please come and take your child. We can't guarantee their safety, essentially, something like that.
Jesus Christ.
It's a densely populated city, at the end of the day, if you're going to do guerrilla warfare there, you will absolutely be killing people. There's just no way around it. And so it's been their decision to go ahead with it regardless. And I have to be, I don't know, I get random accusations online sometimes, I'm too soft on other parties that aren't Hezbollah just because I'm so opposed to Hezbollah. But just to be clear, all of those parties have done this in the past, and many of these parties may still do so in the future. It just so happens that right now the dominant political party is Hezbollah, and I think that no analysis And as I said, it's not about having majority of the vote, but it's just the question of who is the de facto kingmaker. And Hassan Nasrallah, as a leader of a political party, gives more speeches than the president and the prime minister combined, and the speaker of parliament for that matter combined. He sets policies, de facto sets policies, because essentially we can't do anything about it. It's really that simple. And so for me, any kind of analysis that doesn't start from that recognition, if you don't start from that recognition, then it will look weird as to why are they opposing an investigation so much if they have nothing to hide? Well, because they have stuff to hide. It's not rocket science at the end of the day. We're talking about militias. They are the biggest militia, but all of the other political parties, including the Lebanese forces, the Free Patriotic Movement, the PSP, the SSNP, Amal, I'm probably forgetting the Phalanges, the Kataib, as we call them in Arabic, and a number of others I'm probably forgetting, the Future Movement, obviously. They all have their own militias. They all have their, the difference is just how organized are they compared to the rest. And as I said, right now, there's simply no comparison between the capacity that Hezbollah does, although they usually they say that they have 100,000 armed fighters, and so they always exaggerate. We know that, but objectively, they have definitely more men ready to fight than any of the others, and I think that's just an objective fact.
Yeah, well, I saw online. I checked, and I'm pretty sure it was new. There's video of like loads of Hezbollah fighters gathering. They're kind of doing that salute they do. It looks like Nazi salute, Roman salute, whatever it is. There was fucking thousands of them, hundreds of them, maybe not thousands, but like. Yeah. Like they have the fighters there. So what is happening now? Obviously, it didn't go on, thank God, for 2 days. It was over within a few hours. But now, obviously, things are very tense. Friends I'm speaking to in even Beirut are just like fucking terrified. And I know Hezbollah have kind of come out and said a lot of stuff. Maybe just kind of give us an idea of where it's at now, because obviously that was like you said, a very big event. It hasn't been like that since the 80s in Beirut.
Yeah, I would say since 2008, if we include that mini civil war that I mentioned. Yeah. But I mean, yes. Besides that, really, we haven't really seen this in a long time. And so, for my generation, for the most part, this is kind of new. And for younger people, this would be the first time of that scale, anyway. What's happening right now? I mean, a number of things. Hezbollah has accused the Lebanese forces of being those men on the roofs, those snipers. As I said, I think that's a likely possibility, but I just don't know. The Lebanese forces have obviously denied this, and they're basic. So let me put it this way: the tactic of the Lebanese forces, as of now, is to basically portray themselves as the defenders of Lebanon, and they do this in different ways. They have their own audience to whom they kind of promote a more sectarian Christian narrative. And there is the equivalent on the Hezbollah side, in which when they speak to a specific audience, they have more of a sectarian Shia narrative. But then when they're talking to a broader audience, or they're trying to appeal to a broader audience, because they need the system of Lebanon, part of its pros and cons at the same time is that you actually need the other sects, other sectarian warlords, other oligarchs, other what have you, other parties, in order to form enough coalitions to at least be in government. If not in government, at least in opposition within the government. So I think this is basically what's going to happen. Now, this is sort of like the headlines, right? What's also happening at the same time is just a number of things, and I'll try and enlist some of them. One is the case of Ibrahim Hotet, which is actually probably the most depressing story so far. So Ibrahim Hotet formerly was the spokesperson of the families of those who were killed in the Port of Beirut explosion in August 2020. A committee was formed, very similar, again, depressingly so, to the committee that was formed in 1982, called the committee in English, the Committee for the Families of the Disappeared, i.e. those that were forcibly disappeared during the Civil War, which as of now are still officially forcibly disappeared. So for those who know other contexts, it's not that dissimilar from either Bosnia or Argentina or Chile, those kinds of situations. Ibrahim Hotet was, as I said, the spokesperson of that committee. I'm just going to say the committee spokesperson. And on October 15th, he released this very bizarre video in the evening. I sent it to you, basically saying that he denounces the investigation.
Yeah.
Now, this is very weird for various reasons. The body language is quite troubling. You can see him looking over his shoulder. Basically looks like a hostage video. He hasn't been really reachable since. Journalists, including friends of mine, have tried to reach him. He was usually very easily approachable. He wasn't picking up his phone. And it sort of took everyone by surprise for the simple reason that he was actually one of the most vocal supporters of the investigation, including that very same morning, releasing statements to that effect. So the likely story is that, and I will try and, I'm using terms that are objective. It was my personal opinion. I will tell you absolutely it's definitely Hezbollah. But I think objectively, the likely story is that he is being pressured. What happened is that the next day, the rest of the committee, basically everyone else, and remember, we're talking about over 250, I believe, people who were killed either on the day of from the injuries sustained during the Port of Beirut explosion. Reaffirming, so the committee, essentially what's left of it, most of it, reaffirming their support for Judge Tariq Bitar. They redid it today, and I'll explain in a bit why they had to restate it. And today as well, the Fire Brigades Union, the families of the Fire Brigades of Beirut also released a statement supporting the investigation. And the reason why the Fire Brigade is relevant is because I think 19 or 20 of them died in that explosion. It's actually one of the biggest scandals of the past couple of years. And the reason why they had to restate it is that as of a couple of hours ago, before we started recording, he even officially went to the Ministry of Justice, officially demanding the resignation of Judge Tariq Bitar. So what's happening now is, and this is what I mean by more insidious, this is much more dangerous in many ways than any kind of open street battle is trying to force the judge from resigning. I think that they have concluded that he probably is not going to resign. I mean, he still might, so I don't exactly know. But as of now, this does not seem like it's going to happen. So what's the best thing to do? Basically say that there are two committees, not actually one. One committee is saying that they support the judge, and another committee, which as of now is just one person, but the former spokesperson, so this carries a lot of weight, is saying that the judge needs to step down. So you see what's happening now. Now you can easily say, even like on a legal level almost, well, you can't, you may argue, if you are already biased towards Hezbollah, let's say, that we will simply not recognize this committee, the one that we've known for the past year. We will recognize an alternative one. And the alternative one is essentially, defanged. It's not actually calling for accountability. That's basically what happened. And this has already happened in the past. So this rule book isn't exactly new.
Yeah, and that just creates more conflict as well, right? It's like you've created another camp within the camp sort of thing. Like who believes which one?
Yeah, I think the probably what's just going to happen is he is isolated, Ibrahim Hadid, unfortunately, and I don't quite know what's going to happen, because if we assume that he has been threatened, then one should also assume that the threats are basically permanent. They're just gonna be. And I should say he is the brother of someone who died in the explosion.
Really? Okay. Wow. Yeah. That I imagine that holds a lot of weight to it as well for him. Obviously, this isn't just kind of coming out of nowhere, and it's not just at the level it is because of the explosion. I would argue the politics in Lebanon has a lot to do with this kind of chaos and confusion. Where is that at now? Like I've been trying to keep up with it, but it just seems to be a constant gridlock, like the political situation within the government.
Yeah. I mean, right now, so you have I think the first time you had me on was end of 2019, right? Yeah. And back then, I remember basically telling you that I'm not entirely sure whether Hariri is actually gone, because he had resigned back then.
And you were right.
I was right. So since then, he did come back. So there was Hassan Diab after him when he resigned. Then he came back to the scene, and then he resigned again. And now we have Najib Mikati. Now, Najib Mikati, and this is a very Lebanese thing, is another billionaire. Almost all of our prime ministers in the past 30 years have been billionaires. And this is a country, and I'll give some statistics in a bit that I took down before having this chat with you, just to kind of show how extreme we're talking, when we say wealth inequality in Lebanon, what we're talking about. So anyway, Najib Mikati's role right now as prime minister, and kind of a parenthesis, because I think your listeners may know this, but he's actually linked his family is linked in a very weird way to the Myanmar junta right now.
Yeah,
it's a mess. But anyway, his official job right now is to resume the negotiations with the IMF, essentially to ask for another bailout. Now, this bailout will effectively be, and I think it probably will happen, a bailout of the banks. not that dissimilar than what happened back when the financial crash happened in the States. And I think a likely proposition, if you want, is that they're going to actually sell off even whatever's left of state assets, which at this point isn't that much. But it's still devastating in the sense that, okay, let me just give you statistics to kind of give some decent idea. So this, I think, is from the World Food Program. Food prices have gone up 628%. The lira, as in the Lebanese pound, has lost 90% of its value since 2019. The minimum wage is effectively $40 right now. Some 79% as of now of people in Lebanon, citizens in Lebanon, live in poverty, with refugees and other migrants. The numbers are above 90 in some cases. I think one statistic put like food insecurity at 95% of all, basically everyone. Electricity blackouts are very regular. I think the most recent one is either ongoing or I forgot if it's still ongoing, but it was 3 days long. Most people are getting some like an hour, maybe a day, if that. Many people rely on both public and private generators, and both of those haven't really been coming through. So pretty much no one, with the exception of maybe the ultra rich, have access to 24/7 electricity right now. I think the World Bank said that Lebanon is going through one of the worst economic crisis in like 150 years or something like that. So, and we're talking about the past 2 years, right? But this has always been, how do I say this? You could have seen the early like the warning signs pretty early on. At the end of the day, this is an economy that is essentially based on debt and services and financial stuff, like the banks, basically the banks of the region. Lebanon was, among other things, the bank of many regional powers. When the crisis have been hitting, I mean, what I'm talking about, the global pandemic since 2020, but in the case of Lebanon, they started earlier because as early as 2011, one of the consequences of the Arab Spring is that you had basically Gulf money, as in, Gulf Kingdom money sort of dried up for a few years. And that sort of started the precipitation into this decline, essentially. But the decline, sometimes it's steeper than others. And in the past couple of years, is when we've really been, the expressions that people use is that, we're over the brink. That's kind of an annoying expression that media use a lot, like Lebanon's on the brink. It's been on the brink for like a long time now, essentially.
What's the kind of reaction from people in Lebanon now? Some friends I spoke to, like, some are like, look, it's fine. Yeah, it was bad, but it's going to be all right. And then others are just like, no, there's going to be another war. Like, I know it. It's from just a few people I speak to, it seems to be very kind of varying. What have you kind of noticed?
Yeah, a bit of that. There is a generational difference, although it's probably a generalization. But a lot of people of the previous generation, so what you might call the war generation, don't seem to be reacting in the same way as everyone who's younger. Yeah. And that's, you might attribute this to PTSD, coping mechanisms, what have you. I certainly see this in my own family. But when, people who are younger, I would say, effectively millennials and Gen Z or whatever, it feels pretty hopeless. It feels pretty like, even if we say, okay, a civil war isn't going to happen because you can rationalize and say stuff like, Hezbollah is too strong anyway, so you don't have the conditions to have a rival militia or what have you. Even if you can sort of conclude that at the end of the day, there's no future. At the end of the day, pensions are gone, like they've been almost completely decimated. Public jobs are almost completely gone. The only public university in Lebanon, Lebanon only has one public university. It's called the Lebanese University, may shut down for good. Hospitals are constantly asking for, basically on survival mode, whether public, but even some private hospitals on survival mode. Public schools have been on and off for a long time now, and there's been a lot of talks of how like many of them will be forced to shut down permanently. Like, we're talking about in 2000, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018 or so, maybe 2019, if I got the year wrong, the poverty levels in Lebanon was roughly 30%. And now it's almost 80. So we're talking about like a pretty severe degradation from almost all aspects, essentially. Yeah. And so the thing is that people may cope in different ways. Some will be in denial. Some will be depressed. Some will, different things. Unfortunately, a lot of those things have been happening. We've seen increases in suicides or suicide attempts. We've seen the stuff that you might expect, drug use, the kind of stuff that you might expect when people get more desperate. And at the same time, you have a situation where people also feel stuck. At the end of the day, if you get a degree right now in Lebanon, what are you going to do with it? It's creating a lot of situations where I think it's even more difficult for people who are let's say now graduating or in school now or become, I don't know, people who are even younger than I am. I'm 30. I think it looks even bleaker than it does to me. And it looks kind of bleak to me. So what I would say is that this system is both resilient and fragile. It has both components at the same time. We see its fragility on days like last week, the clashes, because at the end of the day, if you didn't really need to have these clashes, you wouldn't really do so. The risks will be too high for you. But if you have risks from within your community, as I think Hezbollah has been witnessing in the past couple of years, and we can talk about that if you want, or for that matter, the rivalry within other sects and when I say sects, I mean specifically the politicization of sects. So it's not like the average person. The average person in Lebanon, honestly, for the most part, don't really think of I am Shia, I am Sunni, I am Christian or whatever. I mean, they do, but it's not that, it doesn't stop you from having friends from other sects or, that kind of thing. But I'm talking about the sectarianism, the politicization of sects, the political system that exists in Lebanon depends on these conflicts. At the end of the day, the reason why in 2019, the chants that we were chanting were, Sha'ab yurid isqat al-nizam, the people want the downfall of the regime. Another chant was Sha'ab yurid isqat al-ta'ifiyya. So instead of the regime, you would say sectarianism. Another one was killun yani killun. All of them means all of them, right? It's pretty straightforward. Like people knew what the problem was. And even back then, I remember, I think I said it on your podcast as well. One of the biggest risks back then is that the rival political parties, the sectarian ones I'm talking about, those that aren't currently in power in the same way as they, may have been some years ago because they've been unseated by Hezbollah and their allies, may be trying to co-opt the uprising. And that's exactly what the Lebanese forces have been doing. That's exactly what the Future Movement under Hariri have been doing, although I think much less effectively than the Lebanese forces for various reasons. I mean, including the fact that Hariri was kidnapped in Saudi Arabia and that sort of thing.
Forgot about that.
Yeah. And so I think the risks right now is kind of what you're already seeing. So the escalation isn't necessarily as grandiose as, putting grandiose in quotation here, as spectacular, let's say, as in the 80s. It may still be. I mean, we haven't even brought up Israel. We don't exactly know what's going to happen on that front yet. But as far as intra-communal conflict, for lack of a better term, is concerned, I think they are likely to continue. I don't see them going anytime soon, with the potential exception of the elections and what happens then, because this can really go in multiple directions. Really, both. I wouldn't go as far. I'm not as optimistic as say good, because I don't think anyone, I don't think we'll have that many independents, for example, being able to win just because they won't be allowed to. But maybe some of the establishment parties, lose some votes, or they get into a more uncomfortable position than they currently are. That is a possible scenario, but we'll see.
Right. I hear what you're saying, but am I right in saying that this is a particularly vital election as well, even though it might, people are not going to get what they want or whatever? It seems to be one that's just because of everything that's happening, it just seems like a really important one. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for one, it will be the first one since the 2019 uprising. And that has objectively changed a lot of things. I think objectively, I think it would be objective to say that significantly more people would be willing to vote for independent parties than ever before. But because of that, I don't know whether the independent candidates will be allowed to run. Now, legally, they would be allowed to run, I think. I don't think they will legally be banned, but they will, be intimidated. That's what happened last time. Hezbollah, for example, in southern Lebanon, attacked a number of the independent candidates. Or it might have been in the Bekaa. I may get those two in Malbak. I may get the two wrong, but either the south or in the Bekaa, I forgot where. But, this may happen. This really may happen. I think if the sectarian parties are in a situation, and I hope it was clear when I say sectarian parties, I mean the establishment parties, if they are in a position where they are actually threatened in a real way by an independent party, they may respond in a certain way. It may be a violent response, or it may be, we will shut down the government response.
Yeah.
By simply withdrawing our people, and therefore you'll either have an election or you have to have a caretaker government, and sort of very similar to what already happened 3-4 times already in the past couple of decades.
That could cause violence in itself, though, right? Like, I know not an immediate one, but it did before.
Yeah. It definitely did before, and the main difference this time is that I don't know how if it does, and hopefully it doesn't, but how it would manifest itself. Because it's just, we're in a very weird situation right now where, as I said, the Lebanese forces have been trying to essentially ride the wave of the uprising. And this has benefited both the Lebanese forces and Hezbollah for the exact same reason. The Lebanese forces say, we are the revolution. And Hezbollah say, yes, you are the revolution. Therefore, the revolution isn't legitimate, right? It works for both sides. I think they may actually gain some political capital from that, the Lebanese forces, I mean, from the primarily FPM, as I mentioned, the Free Patriotic Movement, the rival Christians, if you want to put it that way, that currently are following Michel Aoun, the president, who is like the oldest politician in Lebanon. I think he's like 88 or 89. And his son-in-law, Gebran Bassil, who is actually pretty unpopular, I think, including with the base of FPM, and even, honestly, among Hezbollah and Amal supporters. He's just a very unpopular person, and he is the one who's going to lead the party after Michel Aoun resigns or dies, whichever comes first. And so, excuse me, I think that we're going to see a shuffling of that deck of cards, to use a very annoying metaphor. But I don't know to what extent this is going to change things fundamentally, other than possibly, if not probably, just makes things even worse than now. Because you have to remember that even if we do get what is officially required of them, i.e. Najib Mikati, the current prime minister, who is, again, an extremely corrupt billionaire linked to all sorts of tax haven schemes, you can probably Google him and find a bunch of different stuff. If he manages to convince the IMF to, fix that situation, let's say, that situation is a bailout of the banks. That what we're talking about isn't increasing standards of living. It's not fixing the public sector. It's not saving this university or this school, or lifting people out of poverty. Remember the numbers from 20-ish% to almost 80%. That's not the sort of things that's on the table between the prime minister and basically the Lebanese state and the IMF right now. Those are not the things that will be changed for the better if they do get that bailout. I think maybe what might happen if we do get that bailout is things feel that they're stabilizing for a bit.
Yeah.
But that's all relative. That's all relative. Stabilizing, what does it mean if you don't have fuel or electricity or what have you? All of these options in front of us, and I'm talking about the official scenarios, not whether activists succeed or whether there's an independent or whether there's another revolution and we managed to kick some of them out. Those are scenarios that are possibilities, but we don't know yet. As far as what's happening right now is concerned, there is nothing that objectively indicates that it's not going to get worse objectively. And that's, you can basically, have a chart in front of you and look at all of the different factors and, the variables and what have you. You look at the poverty rates going up. You look at unemployment going up. You look at people dropping out of school because they need to start working at their father's factory. I'm making stuff up, but that kind of scenarios.
Yeah.
None of these things are going to be seriously tackled in any meaningful way by the current IMF Lebanon negotiations. Those are for the banks. Those are for preserving the Lebanese state as it is. Effectively, the bailout is a bailout of the Lebanese establishment, if you want me to put it that way. And because of that, because we know what that has meant in the past 3 decades, it is just logical to conclude that because this very same establishment, and I'm really talking about give or take a few men, those are the exact same men in power since the 80s, some of them since the 70s. And they're not going anywhere. And when they pass away, they will be, the positions will be inherited by their son-in-laws or their sons or cousins or brothers or what have you, always men, of course. And I just don't see how this is gonna change for the better, if you see what I mean.
It doesn't trickle down to the people by any means.
No, it's not even part of the narrative it's not even part of their own discourse that it's going to trickle down to the people. They may kind of pay some lip service to it from time to time, but there's no plan, again, to save the electricity grid, to reform anything in any meaningful way. They're willing, the dominant party is willing to effectively declare war to stop an investigation into one of the largest non-nuclear explosion in modern history. It really, and I'm sorry for repeating this again, but it's not rocket science to understand what their interests are. And to sort of, if that's okay, drive that point home. The last time we had elections, that's when, I'm forgetting I think 2016, if I'm not mistaken. It's all such a blur at this point. But like the last time we had municipal elections, you had on one side in Beirut, Beirut Madinati, which just means like Beirut, my city, which is basically a collection of like technocrats, a bunch of teachers, one movie director, Nadine Labake, who's well known, a bunch of engineers, architects, what have you, kind of like middle-class professionals on one list. And the other list, which was called the Bierte, Beirutis, essentially, was effectively the entire government. And by effectively the entire government, I mean including parties that are currently on opposing side of one another. So I'm talking about Hariri, so the Future Movement, the Lebanese Forces, Free Patriotic Movement, I believe. I think the PSP as well. I'm probably forgetting. Hezbollah wasn't running in Beirut because they run in another thing, so they were not technically involved, but they were supporting that coalition as well. So the entire government, including warlords that were fighting each other during the Civil War, warlords that fought each other in 2008, warlords that right now are fighting each other, came together in order to defeat a bunch of teachers and architects and one movie director. At the end of the day, it's not that difficult. They know how to deal with one another. And I can, depending on how much you want to get into it, I can give even more details, but they know how to deal with one another. They've been doing this for a long time, especially since 2005, which is our big date because that's when the prime minister at the time was assassinated. That's when the current president actually came back from exile. That's when the leader of the Lebanese forces, for that matter, came out of prison. That's when, of course, the Syrian troops that were occupying Lebanon since effectively since the 70s on and off were forced to leave. That the so-called pseudo revolution and everything that came after it. Since then, we've seen these two coalitions, March 8 and March 14. They don't really exist anymore, but it sort of works along similar logics. You might change the pieces of the chessboard. Again, I'm sorry for the annoying metaphors, but like you might change them a bit here and there, but it's more or less the same game, right? They know how to play it, and they much rather have one another as each other's opponents, if you see what I mean, than have to deal with some person saying, hey, we need universal healthcare.
Exactly. Yeah. It's no real, like the opposing party, it's still the part of the old boys club rather than an actual revolutionary kind of new system or whatever.
That's exactly it. And even honestly, revolutionary is like optimistic, even reform.
Yeah.
Like even we need things to be better party, even something like that. Yeah. That would be way more dangerous than Hezbollah having to deal with the Lebanese forces, because at the end of the day, they can deal with one another. They can call each other mass murderers. But last time mass murderers, so Michel Aoun, the current president, and Samir Jaja, some quick background. The reason why Michel Aoun was president, and I hope those are not too many names, but the reason he's president is that Jaja, who was his rival they were warlords fighting each other during the war, essentially, the two rival Christian warlords. Maybe people might know that there is an episode of the war called the War of Brothers, which is very annoying, but that was between them. Actually, no, that's actually Hezbollah and Amal. I apologize. The War of the Mountains, that was between them. They made peace. They cut a cake together. They called it the Christian wedding. And they
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I wish I was joking, but that's
an
what
actual
they did.
cake, yeah.
Yeah, and then they cut it. There you can Google on Jaja cake. You'll find it. It's very annoying. But they came together and they made peace, and that's how Michel Aoun became president. Michel Aoun became president after being endorsed by, and this again, Michel Aoun being the ally of Hezbollah, became president after being endorsed by the party that is currently the most vocally anti-Hezbollah party. And this is a few years ago. This is like 2016 or something.
It's just like nothing means anything, basically.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it works with a percentage of the population, that's for sure, the base, as you might say. But consider that election turnouts are extremely low. There's 20%, maybe something like that.
Really,
maybe
low,
I'm not exactly sure. So, like, most people just don't believe that anything can change, and because of I don't blame people who don't vote, because, as I said, if we do get 80% of people voting for everyone except the establishment parties, I don't know what's going to happen out of this either.
Yeah.
There's this sentence that I use in one of my own writings, like the agents of war become the de facto agents of peace. Like, they are the ones who hold the cause to the war. They are the ones who can reignite a civil war. And so they are when they say, we don't want fitna, like we don't, which I don't know how to translate this, sorry, but like, we don't want a civil war. We don't want things to get worse. Be careful. You're playing with fire. Those are threats. Playing with fire means only something if there is someone on the other side who is capable of carrying out that threat. And that's what they're doing. And playing with fire, by the way, is what Nasrallah said just a few days ago.
Especially for Nasrallah, that's basically saying, like, you're playing here and we will fire back. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to cause fucking war.
Keep to your lane, you know?
Yeah.
Stick to what you know. You're more than welcome to protests from time to time, but don't ask too much. And by too much, basically don't ask anything, effectively.
Yeah. Where, this might sound a weird question, but in amongst all this, where did the Lebanese military come in? Like, even on the streets in Beirut, it just seemed I saw a few pictures of them, but it was just kind of like, like, I guess there's not much they can do. But like, where do they even come into all this?
It's complicated. There was actually one soldier who shot at I believe, Amal militia member. But that person was quickly stopped by the other soldiers. So you have some soldiers from within that are like, you know, the ranks aren't as orderly as maybe they would like to portray it publicly. I'll try to be careful with my own words here, but
sure.
You know, they can't do much against Hezbollah. It's not exactly a secret in Lebanon that they are the second most powerful group, like armed group in the country. It's like, I don't know anyone who would seriously challenge that argument. They have a greater legitimacy if it comes down to it, and you have an actual fight between Hezbollah and the army, which I'll explain why I don't think it's ever going to happen. They may have more popular support, but the reason why it won't happen is that the last time the army disbanded and basically was cut off into various sectarian groups, that was the civil war. And so it's an extremely sensitive topic. That's why the army is the most secular institution. You know, that's why the army has people from all over Lebanon. Actually, this proportionate number of people from working class and poor backgrounds, for example, from northern Lebanon, which is Sunni majority, but also many Shias, many Christians, and so on and so forth, and Druze, and so on and so forth. So I think I don't see a situation where they will get the order to fire back at Hezbollah. At the end of the day, remember, Hezbollah is the dominant party in government, and the government is the one that controls the army. They have the kind of a parallel institution, but not like, you know, in Egypt, or they're not entirely their own thing, and they can't just take over if they want to. They can only rule if they have the support of the other warlords. In fact, the current president, Michel Aoun, was a general of the army. The previous president, Michel Sleiman, was a general of the army as well. So generals of the army are often seen as, you know, the neutral guys, essentially, the guys the consensus candidate. That was the term that was used for Michel Sleiman. And indeed, he was. Michel Sleiman, you know, I'm not exactly a big fan, but not as bad as the current one. But what exactly does that mean? It basically means that you keep the boat floating the way things are. Nothing really changes. There's no real prosperity. Not, you know, it's not like unemployment gets better. You know, none of these factors actually change. But the Lebanese, and kind of like my own interpretation of things, if you want, they looked at what's happening nearby in Syria and Egypt, Yemen, Libya, what have you. And, you basically say, well, we can deal with the devils that we know. That was essentially the bargain, if you want. Things were sometimes bad. Most of the time, things were fine. Like on a daily basis, you can get by. You can live. Let's put it that way. And of course, that changes depending on class and what have you. And I'm generalizing. But it's not as bad. It wasn't as bad as it was now. Now that, if you want to call this a social contract, you may. It's not really, but let's say that social contract or that expectation that people had from the government, i.e., we complain about it. It's shit. We know they're corrupt. We know they're, ex-warlords and oligarchs. We know all of that, but we can protest and they don't shoot at us. That was essentially the bargain at the time. I think that's basically gone. And it's gone for various reasons. One, the army itself has been cracking down. If not them, then the gendarmerie, as in like the parliament's, the parliament's guard.
They're pretty violent as well, right? Like more so sometimes from what I've seen with the protests last year.
The parliament's guard are essentially the private militia of Nabi Hibarir, the leader of Amal.
I see. That's why then.
Well, he's the speaker of parliament and they are his guard. It's pretty...
Got you. Yeah.
Like that's how it is, just how it works. They're absolutely very, very violent indeed. They had a reputation even back when the protests were happening, like in October, November, December, more or less 2019. A lot of the time it would be Amal beating people up and not always Hezbollah. They were usually together, but the Amal guys essentially would sort of stand out with their tattoos and flags and stuff. You would sort of know it was them. And yes, because essentially it's their leader who is the government. It's that simple. You have to, like in Arabic, I don't, but his supporters, the supporters of Mitterrand, the current president, they call him Bay al-Kul, so like the father of everyone, effectively. Godfather. I'm using that metaphor for a reason. It's that. It is really that. And I'm not kidding when I say, and I grew up in some of this background, that there were people in my area, and I grew up in a very Christian, very conservative part of Mount Lebanon, who would look at this as something to look up towards. It's really that simple. Now, they've never been a majority. You never need a majority for that to be the reality. But they have the guns.
When they have the guns like that, it's a majority of firepower, right? So it doesn't matter whether they're majority democratically or not.
Exactly. And there is not a single, with the exception of the army, there is no secular equivalent, if you want, to Hezbollah or the Lebanese forces or what have you. You had in the 70s the PLO and the Communist Party. You had those stuff, but that was a very different context back then. So you don't really have that. And even if you did, at the end of the day, we're talking about more guns in a situation where there is one party that effectively dominates that field.
Yeah. I know you said, obviously, the Christian militias, they've not come out and said, it was us or anything. Obviously, you explained why that makes sense. But have they actually said anything? Like, have they even released any statements or anything like that?
They have.
Yeah.
They were saying stuff like it's, it wasn't us fighting against Hezbollah. It was the locals. It was the people. Because again, this is the game, right? You want to say that you are on the side of Lebanon. For the most part, they don't say stuff like Christians versus Shias. They're not dumb for the most part. Sometimes they do. But they might say stuff like, this is an attack on Christians. And then Nasrallah basically, his response is that we have nothing against Christians. Look, our main ally is Christian. There is a very Lebanese aspect to this. It goes back to the history of Lebanon, like Lebanon being effectively carved out as a Christian state effectively in the 1860s. I don't know if I want to get down that road, but when Lebanon was created after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, first Great Lebanon under the French Mandate, and then the independence in the 50s. 50s. Jesus, I'm forgetting my own history. That was done in a certain way as to privilege existing elites, Beiruti elites, which happened to be Christian and Sunni. You had this gentleman's agreement, if you want, between those two groups of elites, if you want. And the ones who were excluded from that were the Shias. And that's why you had the seeds of later. The reason why, I mentioned, you asked me in the very beginning where Amal came from, and I said that Amal's translation in English is Amal basically, by the way, means hope in Arabic.
Yeah.
It's Amal is the movement for the dispossessed, of the dispossessed. I don't know how you call it in English. And so who are the dispossessed? Historically, those have been Shia Lebanese. And so this is part of the narrative. This is part of the story, the foundational myth, if you want, of first Amal and then Hezbollah that came out of Amal. And in fact, Hezbollah in many ways came out of Amal because Amal was seen as too complacent back then with the Israeli occupation, and Hezbollah was the one that was able to do the work effectively via Iran, obviously. I mean, Iran effectively created Hezbollah for all intents and purposes in 84, I think, officially, or something like that. So, maybe I'm jumping around too much, but all I'm trying to say with all of this is that these political parties, these sectarian political parties specifically, all have their foundational myths. Many of them, I won't list all of them, but the relevant ones in this case is that you have one group, Hezbollah, that calls themselves the Muqawamah, the resistance, right? The thing is that most people don't know that there is another group that also calls themselves the Muqawamah, and that's the Lebanese forces. Hezbollah would call themselves the Islamists, and the Lebanese forces were called Lebanese resistance. And
they're Christian as well, though, right? They come out the Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the past, they would say the Christian resistance. Mm-hmm. Now they're trying to be, more whatever. They would call themselves the Lebanese resistance. And in their narrative, they were resisting the Assad regime. And in the narrative of Hezbollah, they were resisting the Israeli regime. And so you can really see how, depending on where you lived in Lebanon, if you lived in southern Lebanon in the 90s, let's say, when southern Lebanon was still being occupied by Israel, part of your story is that the only group at the time that was doing anything about it was Hezbollah. If you're part of where I came from, I grew up not even knowing much about politics, but assuming that the word resistance meant the Lebanese forces, because that was everywhere around me on billboards and pamphlets and posters and graffitis and whatnot. And the story there, in my own house, for example, was bombed by the Assad regime in 1990 before I was born, etc., etc. The story there was that, this group of people defended the community against those foreign invaders. And you can the facts don't matter as much as what fits within the story, if you see what I mean. And what fits within the story right now, and this works for both of them, Lebanese forces on one side and Hezbollah on the other, is that they are the ones resisting on behalf of Lebanon. Hezbollah will say that they are fighting the Zionists and the Americans and the usual stuff. The Lebanese forces will state that they are fighting the Iranians and Hezbollah and the Syrian regime and the usual stuff. It fits in both narratives at the same time. The only reason why I would, even with that caveat, if you want, still focus more on Hezbollah is simply the fact that right now they are the dominant power, and I don't think there's any scenario in which that is going to change.
Yeah,
in the future.
I think you're right. It's kind of a cynical, but I think you're right. Like, how can it at all? All right, Joey, that was really interesting, mate. Is there anything else you want to mention before I let you go?
I mean, we did. The irony is that we're recording this on October 20th, and 3 days ago was October 17th, which meant 2 years since the uprising even begun, right?
Yeah.
But this is the unfortunate, and you had a few hundred people attending in Beirut. And what's really interesting, and maybe I can kind of end on that, was that on that day, on October 17th, so basically a few days ago, those few hundreds people went down, but they decided to commemorate another date at the same time, which is 6:07 p.m. Because at 6:07 p.m. on August 4th, 2020, is when the explosion in the port of Beirut happened. And so you have essentially this link, subconsciously, consciously, what have you, a link between the October uprising, which started this euphoria, essentially, this exhilaration, possibilities and whatnot, first slowed down, if not stopped, by the pandemic. And then 8 months later, in August, effectively crushed by the explosion. And so people really feel that there was this window of opportunity. It did not last that long in the end. If you think about it, it's just a few months. But so much has happened in those few months that I think it is worth remembering that in the same way as no one really predicted October 17th, And I have a perfect example for that, if that's okay. Like I did an episode with an academic, Andrew Arslan. He wrote a book called Lebanon, a Country in Fragments. And I wrote a book review, of his book, and then I did an episode later on. And the book review came out October 14th, I think, or something like that, just a few days before. And the conclusion that I reached basically was that things are bad. Things are really bad. Things are going to be bad for a long time. And there's no reason to believe otherwise. And 3 days later, I was wrong.
Yeah. Lebanon, though, Lebanon for you. What a beautiful country as well. Like anytime I go, I just think it's so fucking sad the way that the people have the grip on it, But that's what it is. Mate, where can people find your work? Mention your podcast as well. I think definitely our listeners would be interested in that.
Sure. The podcast is called The Fire These Times. I occasionally do stuff on Syria and or Lebanon. Those are the two countries I focus on the most, but occasionally I will do stuff on Palestine otherwise. And I do also have, it's a pretty, if I may say so myself, the episodes can vary quite a bit. Everything from like solar punk to mutual aid to organizing to some political thing to some history of something to could be different thing. People are free to check out like the titles and stuff. They will see like they can listen to whatever they want to listen to. It's probably not every episode is for everyone, I think, but anyway. So that's the podcast. They can find me on my website is just my first name and last name, joeyayoub.com. That's where I archive everything basically. And I am on Twitter as well, at the same handle as well, at Joey Ayoub.
Just spell your handle for me, because every fucking episode someone messaged me like, what was their name? It's like, okay, just so if you just spell the handle.
JoeyAyoub.
All right, mate. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Really appreciate that, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
That was Joey Ayoub speaking about the recent gun battle in Beirut between Hezbollah, Amal, and possibly the Lebanese forces, possibly a different Christian militia, possibly, who knows. Still, nobody is 100% sure. There are some people online saying everybody knows who it is. They're definitely, it was this one, it was that one. Relax. Nobody is actually sure yet. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. For just £5 a month, you get bonus episodes. There's loads of content out there on the Patreon. We got narrated articles, access to the community Discord, video extras. There's a whole series on there. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek called Too Cool for J School. It's about kind of teaching people, I guess, how to be a reporter, or at least giving them tips and advice for myself and several different people. Yeah, there's a lot on there. Patreon.com/popularfront, or go to popularfront.co/support. Remember, we do not accept any corporate backing. We don't have any rich benefactors, nothing like that. So the way we make money is through Patreon and merchandise. If you want to buy our t-shirts, they're cool as fuck. Obviously, go to www.popularfront.shop. You will see them there. Thank you very much to our sponsors. This episode was Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue 97239. This episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South, one in West. Find them on social media at Grindcore House. The episode was also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. Buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. If you want to advertise on the Popular Front podcast, email me at Hanrahan, so that's my surname, HANRAHAN, hanrahan@pm.me. If you want to do it, please do not waste my time. We've had lots of people saying, yeah, I want to do it. Like, all right, cool, this, that, and the third, and then they just kind of fall off. We're not expensive, but we're very picky about who we'll advertise on our podcast. If you want to follow us on social media, Twitter, we got a new Twitter now. It's at @popularfront_. We've started using the Twitter as we use the Instagram. Kind of just Caden, lad on our team, puts out kind of news updates on the world and conflict out on the Twitter. Same as the Instagram. Instagram is at popular.front. Although right now we're getting kind of battered by the pro-censorship mods and algorithms of Instagram. Basically, they've taken away the link button from us. They won't let us stream live. I think we've been banned like 12 times, 18 times. I think one count someone said. Luckily the account is still there, but whatever. Really awful company, but it's a useful platform. So anyway, crying, ranting, whining over Instagram.com/popular.front. youtube.com/popularfront. Please do subscribe to us there. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers on there now, which is great, I think. Yeah, man, I think that's all the socials. I don't know. Yeah, anyway, music in this episode: intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black, as always. Go and find his music at samblackpf.com. Every beat music you hear from Popular Front episodes will not be on there on his SoundCloud. He puts it wherever he wants, and that's that. Sorry, if there's a beat you particularly want, maybe he'll put it up if you ask, but don't just kind of leave him be. He's a busy guy, and he does all our music, and he's just churning out really good stuff all the time. Thank you to the high tier Patreons. They are Champagne Anarchist, that's a good name. Twat, I don't know. Elise Middlefar, Jess, Louis, sorry. David McManus, Joaquin Williamson Holt, Yadoye Travis. Yadoye messaged me and was like, "You have been getting my name right," so I'm fucking glad. So that's good. If I'm saying anyone's name wrong, do message me and let me know. Tom Petrie, James Lyons, I don't know. Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Pete Hesher, RX, A. Nicole, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, MJ, K Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H, Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamondstein, Michael O'Connor, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ron Swanson, check your email please, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan Fitzmadrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, George Arani, D.R., Trey Nance, Amy R., Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Noais, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergschneider, J.L., Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarek, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Maurice Zambul. Thank you all very much, really appreciate it. If you want to support Popular Front, go to patreon.com/popularfront. If you want to buy our merchandise, as I've said, go to popularfront.shop. As I mention and moan about all the time, we are funded completely in a grassroots way. We do not take money from governments. We do not take money from big business. We certainly don't take money from other media corporations. No big corporate events, nothing like that. So if you do want to support us and you want us to keep going, trust me, it's greatly appreciated, and it all goes back into Popular Front, keeps this running. Patreon.com/popularfront. Cheers.